Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Let's Take 5, the podcast where we take a cinema legend and take 5 their films to highlight their excellence and range. My name is Austin Luger.
My name is Eric Martindale.
And we are breaking our format for our finale of this podcast, where instead of taking 5 films from a filmmaker or actor, we are just covering 10 films that we love, essentially, and we want to talk about before we close out the podcast in a few months. Last week we covered Casablanca. Upcoming, we have some great ones like 12 Regular Men, Seventh Seal, Good, Mad, the Ugly. You can see the full list on the website. But today we are covering Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window. This is a 1952 film that stars Jimmy Stewart, former subject of ours on the podcast, Grace Kelly, and upcoming Perry Mason, Raymond Burr. It is about a photographer who travels the world, going to wars in different settings, taking exciting photographs, but he hurt his leg and he's stuck in a cast for many weeks at a time, and he is bored out of his mind. So what he does all day is just look out the window and watch the lives of all of his neighbors. These are people like Miss Torso, who just seems to be a woman who likes dancing a lot. A young couple, you have Miss Lonely Heart, all these nicknames he has for them. But what really catches his eye most is this Mr. Thornwald and his wife, who seem to have disappeared. And we see him take bags out in the middle of the pouring rain in the middle of the night, and Jimmy Stewart, as well as his debutante girlfriend, played by Grace Kelly, they start to wonder, is this just paranoia, or did a murder happen across the street? Across the courtyard area. This is a good movie. I liked it a lot.
It's a very good movie.
It is probably the Hitchcock film I've seen the most, because that's the one I watched the most as a kid.
Mine too. Yeah.
But it'd been a while since I've seen it, and I forgot how eerie it is. Like it's so still and unsettling.
Yeah, it's a great movie. It has one of the greatest sets of all time, which is the view out the rear window. Like the actors you see on each of their porches and their houses, the way they move in and out of the set, the way they use the set, the way they use the way the cinematography works, where it's pointing into the apartment or out of the apartment, to where you feel like you really do feel like you're in the neighborhood. And that's not just like hyperbole, because by the end of it, you know which window everyone occupies, each character occupies. And you know what to expect from those windows, the same way that Jimmy Stewart does in the film, who is laid up, so he doesn't have anything else to do but look outside the window. So it really does establish a sense of place very, very well in a sort of cramped section of the city with all these windows and all these people in them. I mean, it really almost feels like it could be like a play. When you mentioned the paranoia aspects of it, is like, we know for a fact that Thornwald did commit the murder, because we've seen the film. Spoilers if you haven't. I want to know what it's like coming into this film not knowing that he did commit the murder.
Well, it's so weird, because if you don't know anything about the plot, the movie honestly begins as a romantic comedy.
It does. Mm-hmm.
And it's so good. I mean, you have kind of the Hitchcockian dialogue of like, you're looking for something that's going to happen, something kind of feels off, but it's still filmed and done in a very, very light way.
It goes on for a long time.
Yeah, and it's just very pleasant, and you get this sense of boredom being created, and it's something that I'm not sure actually could be pulled off on stage, in addition to making a set this big. Which, by the way, this was all on a sound stage. They built essentially a giant set of fake buildings, and had the actors essentially all kind of act at once as the camera kind of glides around. It's an incredible feat. But yeah, like I was saying, like, it's so meticulous about the way it kind of paces everything, because this is a man who is very antsy. He talks so much about how, like, he likes to be on the road. He likes to just have one suitcase and spend his life, in war-torn areas, and you sleep where you have transportation. And that's the kind of guy who would not do well just like reading a book in his apartment. It is a little prison for him. And I couldn't help but think about, this is 1952. This is starting to become where televisions are coming in the house. And he doesn't have a TV, but essentially he has a very large TV. This is what he chooses to observe, much like his subjects that he takes photos of. And yeah, I love that he never he's not like an investigator. He doesn't want to go learn their names. He's happy just to kind of watch everyone in their environment.
And make up his own sort of stories and wrap them around what he thinks the people are, what they're like, and their personal the personal lives. I will say, the thought did occur to me while I was watching this film that I thought, L.B. Jeffries is the character that Jimmy Stewart plays he's not a great person.
He's an asshole.
Right? I mean, exactly. Like, he comes off is very curmudgeon-y in the film, particularly early in the film. And also, he's staring in people's windows. No one's staring back at him.
Yeah. But
he is definitely... He's a peeping Tom. That is what he's doing. He doesn't have anything else to do. I mean, we get it. I mean, he's bored, and I think that the human side of us can understand that. But he's kind of a creep. Also,
he's such a jerk to Grace Kelly's Lisa. Like, she comes in, clearly very smitten with him, and she brings him like a lobster dinner, and he's like judgmental of like, well, it's better to have beans, in a truck kind of thing. Like, he's like visibly annoyed about this kind of like upper lifestyle.
Perfect, right? Like, right. I mean, okay, so Grace Kelly is basically the picture of perfection. And so that's why she's cast in this role. That's why she works in this role. But Jimmy Stewart is sort of rebelling against that idea. People keep telling him he should get married, he should settle down, and that she's a great woman. And he specifically, quite literally, doesn't like her because she's too great.
Yep.
And that's a hard thing to sort of reconcile as far as a character quirk for people watching a film. I think particularly today, too. Well, so like, I don't know. It's like maybe I don't say people are more like woke now because I don't like really that the assumption that somehow we're smarter. But there is the social dichotomy here is a little odd. It's like you're too perfect. So it's like the woman should strive to be perfect, and then when she's perfect, she's too perfect.
Well, and that's what I think is what makes him such a great asshole. Like, the film is fully aware that the guy is a stubborn jerk, because like when you look at the arcs of the two characters, she's someone who very much likes upper class society. She likes the galas, she likes the dresses, and the film doesn't judge her for that. But she also is someone who is attracted to him and kind of his lifestyle, so she does adjust a bit. She gets into the aspects of spying and observing and kind of recognizing the clues, lots of clues that he didn't get because he doesn't know like the lifestyle and what an accessory would mean to a woman. But at the end, it's kind of brilliant because when she's lying in bed, she's reading like a sophisticated nature magazine, but then she also goes back to her fashion magazine because she's someone who is very happy in both worlds. And the film never said that like the high fashion one is bad. And whereas he is so stubborn, will not kind of look into her interests, and instead the film just punishes him further and breaks his other leg again.
That's true. And then he's going to be stuck looking out the window again.
Yeah. So I kind of like the idea of like, because of how little he changes, the more he's just being like cosmically tortured.
Now, as far as suspense in a film, I mean, obviously Hitchcock is sort of known for the master of suspense. And if this podcast would have gone on longer than it's going to, inevitably we would have done Alfred Hitchcock as well, which is part of why we chose this film. How, in your mind, does Hitchcock use? Because you're kind of the Hitchcock expert here. I toot your own term. Well, first of all, explain why you're the Hitchcock expert.
I don't know. I mean, I did a long like study of him in college and did a little keynote speech about him. But I've seen all of his movies, including his silent films. I've read lots of books about him.
Does this film stand as sort of is Rear Window the thing? I mean, obviously it's like Rear Window and Psycho, I think, as far as like the suspense films, as far as his popular cinema, are the most known films. I guess if you were going to show some person one Hitchcock film or two Hitchcock films, would Rear Window be one of those two?
Yeah, probably one of like, this is one of his more like populist kind of films that is very like anyone of any age can like. But it starts to also have the seeds of the more, not risque, but like grosser films that he always has. And that is under the surface here as well, because people talk so much about the Hitchcock blondes for a reason. And he always kind of has that voyeuristic camera lens on them. And that was also something that was evident behind the scenes as well. And you have that here with Jimmy Stewart watching this woman across the way only because she's attractive. Like, there's nothing of her storylines going on except for her sometimes being topless, putting on a bra, and dancing around. The story that storyline has a very funny punchline at the end.
It does, yeah.
But Hitchcock is not afraid to kind of just cut back to Jimmy Stewart, just like being a creep and looking at her. And you got to get those aspects as well. But why this stands out to me as such a Hitchcock achievement is this very particular way of doing suspense. He wasn't someone who would, repeat himself that often. He would have themes and motifs he would do all the time. But this idea of just kind of having boredom be suspenseful was something that was really kind of clever and still hard to replicate, because like I noticed this viewing that so many scenes begin, in media res, partly because there is for this character no like end of a scene for him. It has just been like one continuous thing going on. Because even when
you're right, yeah.
Even when he falls asleep, he wakes up for a little bit just because he hears something in the courtyard, because he's just always facing the courtyard. He doesn't even go to bed to kind of split up his day. And, he'll see someone like walking outside and then go back to sleep, because it's not like a scene had started. He just had a few moments where he's looking this way for that moment.
Yeah, those fade to blacks that sort of make the film feel like a series of vignettes, I think, are highly effective. Mm-hmm. Because it's like we're turning the lens on just when he's going to notice something, and then we're turning it back off when he isn't. It's like, it's really, they're almost like jump cuts, but they're not. Because it does fade to black, but it's a really effective way of doing the film, and I think for the reasons you kind of just stated, right? It's like, okay, what's going to happen this time? There's the idea that Hitchcock, it's a Hitchcock film, so you know how things are sort of treading. This is probably going to go in some dark place, so that there's that drum beating as well. But it's like, it was a really effective way to create suspense.
And even like when things are not necessarily like eerie at that moment, you have these times where you kind of come back in from a fade to black and you're mid-conversation with the nurse. Mm-hmm. Like, it just has this like ongoing feeling, and it kind of disrupts the element of time. There's never a moment in the middle of the night when he wakes up and he looks at a watch. It just kind of all blends together in this blur that you kind of feel like he's lived in for many weeks. Whereas like Grace Kelly has so much structure in her life where, she's clearly been to a ball, or like she changes clothes, and that has aspect of time, where he just wears the exact same pajamas the whole movie. Mm-hmm. And that's wild. That's, it starts to feel more and more like a prison, even though his apartment, is great, annoyingly so, especially for a man who is never home. You never even get to explore it. I don't think he doesn't go into the kitchen. Other characters
No,
do.
you just see it in that room, yeah.
Yeah, and he goes to bed one time just for a massage from from Stella, the nurse who kind of looks after him. But yeah, and it's great because of that. And it's clearly
it's also sorry to cut you off, but it's also another thing that's really, I think, effective too, is that once you see how the set works and it interacts, because there's ladders go in certain areas, there's stairs go in certain areas, there's doorways leading certain areas, and they can pop up in other areas. It's like setting up Mousetrap and then like setting the trap off. Like Mousetrap, the board game. I assume most people know what that is, but it's really, really cool too when you take a character out of his world, because we don't leave it. Mm-hmm. We're always in that apartment. And sending that character out onto the set to interact with that world out there, then it gets really suspenseful because he can't talk to them. We just observe the action. Mm-hmm. And especially when there's a guy who's a murderer. So we can watch him on level 2, and she's on the first level. Then she'll climb up here, and then he'll move up there, and we're watching it all happen. And the camera is either showing us the way, the ball's sort of going down the track in the mousetrap, i.e. Grace Kelly or Raymond Burr, and simultaneously showing us James Stewart reacting the same way we are. He's having the suspense as well. He's sharing it. He's sharing it with us because he's afraid she's going to get killed. And you're watching that play out, and there's no way to help her. You just have to watch. That really adds suspense, right? Yeah. And also that you can watch other floors. I mean, there's a woman about to kill herself on the bottom floor at one point. She's going to commit suicide, and we know why she is because we've been watching in on her too, and the movie's done a brilliant job of establishing that. Meanwhile, Grace Kelly's about to get murdered on the floor above by Raymond Burr. So you're like watching these two things that are both extraordinarily suspenseful, and we can't do anything about it. We can only watch. It's really, really, really effective.
Yeah, it's wild because for so much of the film, really until the final minutes, the camera is only stationed within his apartment to kind of look at his perspective. And I kind of forgot how long it takes for you to see a close-up of Raymond Burr's face because he's just very happy to watch people from that far away. Yeah. And it's impressive to have to act in such a extreme wide shot. It's only when he starts to use his binoculars and then brilliantly his camera lens.
Right.
Although he never takes a photo, which drives me nuts. Once I saw him like straight up looking at evidence. Yeah. Phil may have been a good idea, but I don't think he had it.
As far as the camera, it's an achievement in cinematography, but there's one thing that bothers me about this film as far as that's concerned, and I just have to say it. So every shot in this film is either from a perspective of there's a fulcrum. The fulcrum is outside the apartment. Sometimes we look inside. And we look inside Jeffrey's apartment sometimes, and most of the time, though, we are observing things from outside the apartment or inside to outside. The angles are very much looking in or looking out. That's basically what's always going on, except for one shot of the film.
I think I caught. There's a lot more this time. I caught a lot because he changes the rules once he goes out the window. He's hanging off the edge. And Burr's in his apartment going to attack. Once he leaves. And once he is seen by the neighbors, he's no longer invisible, and people are shouting to help him. Then we get angles from the cameras on the ground of the courtyard. We see people kind of in parallel.
Yes, that I was aware of. That makes total sense, and that's brilliant. Which I think makes what I'm about to say even more of an eyesore. Once the dog is killed, he's not spotted yet.
Yeah.
So once the dog is killed, you see the reactions from everyone in the windows reacting to this woman screaming about a dog that got murdered. Surprise, surprise. Raymond Burr killed the dog too.
It's crazy that a dog dies in this movie. Yeah. It's so sad. And
it is. There is a shot from the ground looking up at Miss Torso.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I hate that so much. Because it runs. No one else got that reaction shot. If everyone else had got it, I would have seen it making some sort of sense of continuity amongst these reaction shots. But no one else got it, and it was almost like Alfred Hitchcock's love for the young blonde got in the way of the filmmaking. Because as you said, all the shots are in and out, except for after he's spotted and then falls out the window. Then we have shots from inside the courtyard, except for Miss Torso's reaction shot to the dog being killed.
That's so funny. I know that you're upset about one shot and always forget where it is in the movie.
That's the one. I think I probably mentioned it on the podcast before, or talking about something else at some point.
I just couldn't remember. I thought it, when I was watching this time, I was like, I think what he's mad about is during this sequence, and that I think it fits within the rules. Nope, if it's earlier, that breaks the rules for sure.
Yeah, it makes it worse, I think.
Yeah,
because now we can establish, because what you said I think is accurate, and that makes it even so much better. That once he's seen, then the rules are broken and they crumble. But so it almost makes it more obvious that is exactly what he was doing, which means this runs even further contrary to that idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's a weird thing to get hung up on, but it's only because everything around it is so brilliant.
Close. Yeah. Another way that the camera does kind of depict Jimmy Stewart's invisible nature that I really like is, especially when it's nighttime, there is a very clear shadow on him. So if he rolls back in his wheelchair, it kind of goes down his face. Brilliant. It's so cool because it's not just like, okay, he's, ominous in the shadows. That's actually like the line perspective of like what they would be able to see from across the way. And it's so satisfying. And oh, man.
It reminds me of like shadows in video games. Like, like you can't be seen in the shadow if you're hiding there typically. And it doesn't mean the character would actually necessarily be invisible, but this is a rule we're establishing for this game. Okay. Same thing here. It's like, it's an easy, definable visual for the audience watching to say, okay, you are now invisible if you cross this shadow. Like, and it's really cool because again, it's establishing the rules and letting us sort of play the game. Whereas like, lesser movies, I don't know, would have taken the time to even worry about something like that. But that little small thing is so effective. It's brilliant.
It's funny you say that because I actually thought about video games as well during this movie. You mentioned the eeriness of having Grace Kelly, who's been in the apartment the entire time, now across the way in these smaller rooms, and you can't do anything about it. The movie, of course, also does the flip side, where Raymond Burr is now in Jimmy Stewart's apartment, and he's this close, and he is full size, essentially. And the great way of how do you have a man who can't stand up defend himself against a murderer who's been strangling people is that he uses the flash bulbs on his camera. And that whole sequence reminded me of like a Legend of Zelda boss fight, because whenever he flashes the light, Raymond Burr pauses, stops, wipes his eyes, and then like moves 2 steps forward and does like the exact same movement 3 times in a row. I'm like, yeah, that's when you do the sword attack. You do the blind move. It was just such a very fun. I mean, like, it is creepy because he's just stopping and you can only pause for a moment. You're stalling towards who knows what, because you've tried to get attention and you can't. And yeah, it's really kind of terrifying because all he's been able to do is observe. He has no action he can do, and then he gets thrown out the window. His window. It's great.
Yeah, out the window, which is great. One other thing that I think is really kind of neat that I don't think is talked about a lot is that Jeffrey starts to establish evidence for why he thinks that, and again, you don't know whether it's paranoia or whether or not it's real, but he's slowly losing his mind. But he has this evidence he's establishing about this person across the street for why he thinks he killed his wife. None of the evidence that he gives is the biggest evidence at all. He heard the murder.
Mm-hmm.
He just doesn't remember it because he was dozing.
Yeah.
The camera turns up. We hear a scream, and he kind of like moves, and then that's it.
Yeah.
So I like that too. It's like there was a scream that happens that he never ever brings up because he doesn't remember it.
And it's so funny because
the movie never talks about it.
And it kind of hints around what his career is as a photographer, because like early on when he's talking to his editor, he says, "Hey, you get out of the cast today. You want to go back to work?" And he goes, "It's next week." Well, first of all, he's judging the editor a lot for missing what week it is, which I think it just adds to his delightful assholeness. But he talks about like, oh yeah, there's a coup, happening in blah, blah, blah. And he goes, I told you to keep an eye on that one. That was the next place I was going to boil. And which kind of implies like a great like nature photographer as well. If you just are patient and go to the place where you think it's going to be, you're likely to see something. And that's what he's doing. He's looking for any sort of relief just of like a soap opera to watch, essentially. But by being patient and looking in the right direction, he solved a murder that was not going to be solved. It's such a great parallel of his profession.
I think this for me is the movie of Hitchcock's that I think that I would show people if they haven't seen Hitchcock.
Mm-hmm.
I think Psycho's probably right there, nipping at his heels. I love North by Northwest. If you've heard me talk on this podcast, if you listen to the Jimmy Stewart 5, you know that I'm not a big fan of Vertigo, so that makes one person. But this movie really, I think, is universally appealing, even today. Okay, kind of like Casablanca we covered last week. I mean, it's really, really one of those films that you just have to watch. You have to see it,
and it's fun.
It's a lot of fun,
and
it's a very fun movie.
Because you're asking kind of what two you would show. To me, his most fun films are this and North by Northwest, and the ones I think are equally brilliant but are a grosser look at humanity is Psycho and Vertigo. Both super entertaining films, but man, did essentially Hitchcock could be called like Spielberg for Spielberg. He just knew how to make the most entertaining film with all of his technical genius. This is a blast.
Yeah, and it has the more of a popcorn feel than like Psycho. Like you're talking about it being gross and stuff like that, because the what happened in this movie is that Lars Thornwald killed his wife and cut her up.
Mm-hmm. And buried her in the car.
That happened. He
and then
cut
he killed
her
a dog.
And, I know, and strangled a dog. And yet, because we never see this, we are somehow sort of removed from it. Mm-hmm. Where we don't have those scenes like you have in Psycho, where she's stabbed to death in the shower. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very violent scene. That doesn't happen here. Mm-hmm. You almost feel removed from the violence, which sort of adds to the whole voyeurism aspect of the whole thing. Because if you actually saw something like that, it would ruin the entire film. Because the whole film's fear is sort of predicated on the idea of not just what you see out your window, but what you can't see behind a closed curtain.
Yeah.
So you have to imagine. And it's really, really good.
Yeah, I know that they made a remake with Christopher Reeve. I never saw it. I know they had the unofficial remake, aka just ripoff, Disturbia, with Shia LaBeouf, where he's under house arrest. That I think it really can't be any other time but this time, because this is a pre-TV setting. You can't. This level of boredom is very specific and very. This is it. This is all you have to see the world.
Yeah, because he'd be watching TV or doing something else. Also, another thing that's really important is that, and I know not everybody has air conditioning, but a lot of people do. It's really, really hot outside, so everybody has to keep their window open.
I love the couple that sleeps on the balcony.
Yeah. The couple with the dog.
Yeah.
It's their dog that gets killed, man.
Ugh.
You want to see a dog ride in a basket? This is the film to watch. This dog rides from the top window down to the bottom to do their business in a little basket.
It's so sad because then, when the dog's dead, they put it up the basket as the woman's crying out in the courtyard. But
then at the end, she puts a puppy in the basket.
That's true.
They got a new dog.
That is true. I'm just saying, if John Wick was here, Thornwall would be dead. Everyone would be dead. It'd be a short film, though. Anyway, This was a great one. And we'll be back next week with another great film. We'll be reviewing 12 Angry Men. Until then, you can check us out a whole bunch of different places, including artmore.com. You can leave a comment there and let us know what you think of Rear Window. Check out other podcasts while you're there. The Immortals every week reviews one of the 1001 movies, albums, songs, and TV shows you must consume before you die. Yesterday's episode had a fun old Hollywood movie as well, The Adventures of Robin Hood, co-starring Claude Rains from last week's episode about Casablanca. We also listened to Leonard Cohen and watched Dark Shadows. Ad Absurdum is, at this point, back, I believe, with a new episode. The two real-life lawyers who talk about pop culture and the real-life legal implications from that. They reviewed the 90s film Dave. It was not really a review. They just talk about, what would happen if Kevin Kline was an impersonator of the president and then had to be the president secretly. So it'll be a really fun episode. Check that out on Ad Absurdum.
I like a movie called Kenji Musha. Your thoughts?
They're very similar. Sigourney Weaver's in both.
Yeah.
But where can we find you, Eric?
Constant Aversion's my YouTube channel. Check me out there.
Subscribe for an upcoming video.
That's right.
Also online, you can check us on Twitter at The Immortals Pod. Special thanks to Adam Lord for all the music. Leave us a review on iTunes. People can find this show. And, until then, I'm Austin Luger.
I'm Eric Martindale.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Go on, pick it up, Thorwald. Go on, you're curious. Go on, you wonder if it's your girlfriend. Call in the one you killed for her. Go on, pick it up.
Hello?
Did you get my note? Well, did you get it, Thorwald?
Who are you?
I'll give you a chance to find out. Meet me in the bar at the Albert Hotel. Do it right away.
Why should I?
Little business meeting to settle the estate of your late wife.
I don't know what you mean.
Now, come on, quit stalling, Thorwald, or I'll hang up and call the police.
I have only $100 or so.
That's a start. I'm at the Albert now. I'll be looking for you.